Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 575 for March 4th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this week's episode. We hope everyone is having a great time as we inch closer to the Oscars.
We're so close.
Part 2 just released in theaters. It was absolutely insane, the discourse on social media this week.
The discourse around science fiction's been kind of unnerving, to say the least, hasn't it? I think particularly around Blade Runner, I feel like, is where the discourse has been the most insufferable. Maybe we'll talk about it. Maybe we won't.
Yeah, we'll see if we get to that or not. I honestly didn't see much of that. I did see a whole lot of Dune memes, though, and a lot of Dune conversation. And honestly, it was quite invigorating to see everything that took place on the internet over the weekend, because it means that people are back in theaters and are going to see Dune. People love them some Dune.
If it does well, is this going to be Dunenheimer?
Dune Part 2-enheimer, at the very least.
Well, at least, I mean, it seems like we kind of know for sure that Dune Messiah will be coming at some point.
Absolutely. And we'll get to that here shortly. Before we do, and to reiterate something Brennan said, we're also going to be talking about sci-fi movies on this week's episode. It's really interesting because I mentioned this to Brendan, something along the lines of doing top 5 sci-fi movies.
Yep.
Assuming that we had already done this on the show. It feels like an easy topic to do.
I was just going to say, this is low-hanging fruit. It really is.
Low-hanging fruit. We've been doing this show for over 11 years now. You would think, let's do top 5 sci-fi movies.
Yeah.
And we actually haven't. So I looked it up on our website. We've done 80s sci-fi movies. We've done quote-unquote thinking sci-fi movies. We've done sci-fi characters, sci-fi scores, and that's it. That's as far as the sci-fi list goes, which is not enough sci-fi lists. I feel like.
I wonder why we haven't done something as broad as top 5 sci-fi movies or something like that. And maybe we always talked about it, but we decided to keep saving it for what would feel like the right episode, and we just never got to it.
And we never did. We've had plenty of opportunities too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, no better time than now under this new format to talk about something a bit broader in this way, even though we are segmenting this to a certain time period, as you talked about. But still,
we're going to do this 21st century so far. So it's still not as broad as it could be. And I don't know if you'd want this to be super broad. I mean, maybe that could be a fun conversation too.
It would be. I think it'd be better suited as like a conversation as opposed to like a top list, because many of your favorite movies of all time, as well as mine, are somewhere in the sci-fi genre or even subgenre.
Yeah.
So it then ends up turning into a conversation about just a handful of some of our all-time favorite movies. You know, it's
So I do think segmenting this to a specific time frame, it helps narrow it down for sure.
Yeah,
and also it's of course inspired off of Denis Villeneuve and Dune, and Villeneuve is known for doing sci-fi movies in this century.
Well, he is the sci-fi guy now. I mean, he really is. I mean, after Arrival, he then had Blade Runner 2049. Now both Dunes Part 1 and 2. He will be continuing that with Dune Messiah probably some years from now, given the nature of that story. But he's also...
I would throw Enemy in there as well.
That is kind of sci-fi adjacent. Yeah, you're right. But then he's also got Rendezvous with Rama coming out, which is a classic Arthur C. Clarke story. That's a classic sci-fi novel. So he's not far removed from science fiction.
Man.
Yeah, he is.
And I love Denis Villeneuve. And so it just feels appropriate to narrow it down to this time period. So that's what we're going to do. Before we get there, though, I want to say a huge thank you to our VIP members. We've expanded out our VIP membership. We still have Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. If you want to sign up there, it really helps out the show quite a bit. But as we noted a few weeks ago, we now have YouTube memberships if you want to join there. And we have Apple Podcast subscriptions. Again, those are low monthly fees, but really helps out the show, and you get access to all of our bonus content. And we had a really fun bonus content episode that came out this week. So definitely want to urge people to go and check that out. It is available, if not right now, then very, very soon. Okay, as we jump into the show, I actually want to start with Dune Part 2. Okay. Because last year, we devoted, Brendan, so much time to Barbenheimer. And the impact that had on the overall year, especially at the box office, and how that has helped, quote unquote, save the theatrical distribution, and in addition to what Top Gun Maverick did the year previously. Now we'll see where this goes, but Dune Part 2 doubled its opening box office from the first Dune, which is really exciting. And actually, just by a hair, edged out Oppenheimer's opening weekend numbers as well.
See, that's the most exciting part, because if we remember when Dune Part 1 came out, there was a lot of contention around it that it was also released on HBO Max at the same time. So that would have hurt some of its box office numbers. But the fact that Dune Part 2 and its opening weekend is showing similar Oppenheimer-like legs, just in its opening alone, is really interesting, and honestly makes it seem like there was more sense when it came to Warner Brothers actually pushing it back a year. So that way it would actually have its own like cinematic definition to prove in this year. So I get what they did there, if that really was their goal, or they just got lucky. I don't know.
I don't know. That's what's interesting, is that coming off the heels of Barbenheimer last year, and we talked about how there was this escalating momentum, especially for movies that didn't feel like massive nostalgic IP. Because let's be honest, there's no nostalgic allurings that bring people into Dune. Especially from a film perspective.
I mean, I don't know about you, but
Dune does not have a legacy.
I felt a waft of nostalgia when I went to go and see Oppenheimer. Felt like I knew
Dune
the man.
Specifically is what I was referring to there.
Yeah.
Because David Lynch's Dune doesn't have the greatest reputation, and the book certainly has an avid fan base for sure. But I wouldn't say that is the same cinematic box office draw as a Marvel, DC, things of that nature.
Would that help it a little bit, though? Because even though Frank Herbert's original stories don't have that same allure as, let's say, a Marvel property or a DC property would these days, or even a Star Wars would, the world of Dune is still kind of top of mind when it comes to like the cultural zeitgeist, especially in the realm of science fiction. So could that create a lingering curiosity in audiences that they're seeing something new but still somewhat familiar, almost like it bridges the gap a little bit? And maybe that's something that could be helping it in its case.
Yeah, perhaps. And I think part of the Turing test here would have been Dune Part 1 if it had a true theatrical release, but it was hindered, so we don't really know.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that film is there's of course the scope and the scale to it. It has an extensive cast, and by 2021, people knew the name Denis Villeneuve,
right?
To some degree. Yeah. There was of course all of the marketing for Dune Part 1 as well.
Sure.
If it was released in a post-pandemic world like Part 2, I'm curious what the draw would have been there, because I think it adds more weight to what you're saying there. If it comes out, there's no restrictions, no pandemic to speak of, and the numbers are still huge. Then it's like, okay, maybe there's something to this.
This is even proving the point further about what we talked about with Barbie and Oppenheimer doing so well. Is that craving for something different, and that would justify it even further if that were the case.
Absolutely. And I think it's indicative in something like the Tenet hype right now. that being re-released because, of course, like Part 1, Dune Part 1, that is, it came out during the pandemic and not a lot of people saw it in theaters.
Yeah.
And it feels, it has this invigoration to it that isn't your typical nostalgic IP that's being forced down our throats all the time.
Right.
And so Dune is certainly a big part of that. I do wonder, though, if coming off the heels of Barbenheimer and the momentum that was carried there, if it stuck to that initial release date in October, I believe it was last year.
Yeah.
If maybe it could have done better. I don't know. But, I still feel like the Barbenheimer steam is still kind of there with the Oscars coming up here very soon.
It is. And maybe that was part of the reason for its success, was that it almost seems as though the Barbenheimer mentality was more top of mind alongside Oscar season than it was maybe around October or November. I don't really know.
Yeah.
And that certainly helps. Also knowing, Warner Brothers being backed behind it too would have something to say about that relationship and how Barbie's doing and vice versa. So I don't know. Like we joked about, Warner Brothers has made some really dumb decisions over the past couple years. So if this does work out in their favor, it's hard not to hypothesize that they just got lucky. But, it does make an interesting point that putting it earlier in this year and waiting like they did, it's almost like it gave the film more room to have its own grassroots marketing campaign formulate. And it wasn't really that wasn't the literal case here, but it did have some similar legs in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the Barbenheimer part of this, what's really helped out is, and I mean this in all sincerity, as funny as it is the Dune popcorn bucket.
God, because it's so stupid, but man, is that thing marketable?
It was immensely popular in terms of the discourse and the memes and the jokes all over social media.
That's how you market a movie. You got to create something that's so meme-ifiable.
And that's the thing. They created that bucket. I don't know if they intended for it to become as meme-ified as it did. If that was truly the intent, then brilliant. Absolute brilliant strategy.
Bravo.
But I do think it's a little accidental. And it came out organically, much like Barbenheimer did. Barbenheimer doesn't work if it's forced down our throats, as we talked about last year. And that's the thing with the Dune popcorn bucket. People saw that, laughed at it, knew that it was silly, and then went crazy, turned it into a wildfire of memes.
But again, it didn't force it down your throats. You didn't have to purchase this bucket to go and see Dune Part 2.
You did. It was just...
You didn't have to ride on a mechanical sandworm through a Regal theater or an AMC theater, I think it was. Remember that thing going viral just recently? You didn't have to do something like that, but its audiences playing along with the marketing campaign. That's kind of the brilliance of why it's succeeding. That's when a marketing campaign for a movie is successful nowadays.
I completely agree. One of my favorite memes, if not my favorite tweet of the weekend, was the guy with the t-shirt that just said, "I'm just here to F the Dune popcorn bucket." Just wearing a t-shirt. Hilarious. And that that's just all amazing. Organic viral marketing that certainly, helped amplify the hype for the movie for sure.
Yeah.
And all the traditional marketing behind Dune. And I do think, to Warner Brothers' credit, they picked a really good spot, I guess, for early on in the year.
Yeah.
Because the only thing leading up to this was Drive Away Dolls, Ordinary Angels, two really small films, the Bob Marley movie, Madam Web, which was absolutely
that doesn't count.
Burger.
Yeah.
Lisa Frankenstein, Out of Darkness, the week before, excuse me.
Yeah.
Argyle is the biggest thing to come out this year that was competing with Dune. And that came out February 2nd, a month ago.
Yeah.
There's absolutely zero competition.
There's zero there. But at the same time, and I don't know if this is, the grassroots marketing side of it, or if it's just the marketing that Warner Brothers put together for the movie, but Dune Part 2 feels like an event. Like many years ago, when I say many, I really mean let's say 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, when Marvel Entertainment was really just taking over. if a nearly 3-hour movie came out that wasn't Avengers Endgame or something, I feel like it didn't feel like the same type of event that a Barbenheimer or now a Dune Part 2 did. And it's kind of neat to get back into that same kind of world that, okay, we're going to the theater because we're actually seeing something big. It's like we're going to see an opera or something like that. And I miss those feelings. We used to have those back in the early 2000s, and I think we're getting those again now. We're getting the vibe back again, which is interesting.
I agree. The vibes are really great in that regard for sure. And you're right that it's an event. It was always going to do well regardless. There was some pre-built-in hype even last year coming off the heels of Barbenheimer. Oh my gosh, I'm very excited for Dune. When they announced they were pushing it to March, there was a lot of disappointment that was expressed. Yeah. So the idea that this was an event was very much there. I guess what I'm speculating is the box office success it saw this weekend would it have been the same if they stayed in October? I don't know. I very much see the argument going both ways. But it's fascinating nonetheless that the whole idea of Barbenheimer, the idea that we're salivating for something beyond the trashy IP movies that we get all the time, it's still lingering. It's still, it's kicking off 2024 in a very fascinating way.
Yeah. Well, now the question is, will it continue? Will it have legs? And looking at what's coming out in the weeks from now, I think there's a very good chance that Dune Part 2 is going to have legs. I mean, of course, it's going to have to compete with Kung Fu Panda 4 next weekend, which, I mean, I feel like it's possible that maybe DreamWorks waited too long to continue that franchise. So it's possible Dune still holds its legs even next weekend. What's after that? You've got Love Lies Bleeding, The American Society of Magical Negroes. March 22nd is when we see the new Ghostbusters film, Frozen Empire, and then Problemista. Like, do we see Dune doing very well for pretty much the entirety of March?
I think so. Honestly, I could be misjudging Ghostbusters, but I don't think there's a competitor here until Godzilla and Kong at the end of the month.
I'm kind of with you. I'm kind of with you on that. That's at least my guess.
Yeah, so I don't think they have much of a competition, and I do think this could very much have legs. And I am really curious to see how that plays out, because going back to the numbers again real fast, because I don't think we stated specifically, its domestic run this last weekend was 82,505,000, which is again a hair larger than Oppenheimer. And worldwide already it's at 182.
Oh, that's insane.
Not bad. Not bad for your opening weekend.
It's not bad at all. Not bad at all.
For a Dune movie. Now, I mean, if we were talking about a large Marvel movie that costs $300 million to make, then maybe
it would probably look like an eighth as good as a Dune movie.
Yeah. Now this still has some work to do, because I believe its budget was 190, which is still large, plus marketing. So it has some work to do to get back to even, but that is a hell of a start for a Dune movie.
It's a hell of a start, and I think the word of mouth will bring people back.
The word of mouth, for sure, especially given not just all of the pre-built-in memes with the popcorn bucket, but now that the film has been released, I joked about it to begin the show. Like, my whole feed was full of Dune imagery and memes. That was the whole conversation. Everything else was drowned out because of Dune. So I do think that has spurned on a word of mouth that will, at the very least, continue into this weekend and probably next. But to your point, probably it's all about to the end of the month.
It's all about word of mouth. And I think a great example of that too, and I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but do you ever hear the story from Morgan Freeman as to why the Shawshank Redemption failed when it first came out?
Yes, I have heard that. Yeah.
But again, word of mouth is the reason why that movie didn't do well, because no one could remember the darn title.
Yeah. I don't know if that's true, but that's a funny story.
Yes. But it just goes to show, like, it's proof how word of mouth is what
it is powerful.
Movie. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm really curious to see what the next few weeks look like for Dune Part 2.
Yeah, because I think you're right. Godzilla X Kong is probably its only competition. I mean, aside from that, maybe the only other competitor is the re-release of Pixar's Luca, which I mean that's only for 1 weekend if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
No, and like regardless of how well Luca or even Kung Fu Panda does, those are different demographics. So I don't think that will really hurt Dune at all.
Yeah.
Regardless of how good those do.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that. We'll of course have a review of Dune Part 2 coming out very, very soon, so be on the lookout for that. Before we get to our top 5 list, Brendan, want to quickly speak to the Oscars. It is coming up this weekend, it turns out. We just released a Chasing the Gold episode where we did our Oscars predictions.
Yep.
It was a lot of fun. It was myself and Brian Rowe and Shadon Larkey and Erica Richards. It was a great time. Definitely urge everyone to go and check out that show. I guess to reiterate an announcement from that show moving forward, I'm very excited for this. Shadon and Erica will be our new host of Chasing the Gold.
Nice. Love it.
Going into the new year. I can't wait to see what they do with that show. They're going to come up with a whole programming plan, and they'll have more episodes, and we'll be able to do more on the award side of things. I think we all know that I am probably not the greatest host for Chasing the Gold, given my feelings on award season.
Art in the sports.
And look, I love the Oscars. I talked about this quite a bit on Chasing the Gold. I have nothing against the Oscars. If it was all about celebrating art and movies and the craft, then the Oscars, I think, is amazing. And that is the heart of it. That is the purity of the Oscars. But we all know it's certainly much more than that. It's political. It's been sportsified in ways that I don't love. And so I have some mixed feelings on it and have been
entirely fair.
Pretty audible about it. And also, I'm just not in that scene. I'm not an Oscars pundit by any stretch of the imagination.
I like the movies.
Yeah. I can talk about the movies all day.
Me too. Sure. Me too. I could talk about the ceremony, but I'm not really. I don't get bogged down by the I guess the statistics of the Oscars and the award season in general, which is interesting because a lot of my day job involves numbers and business analysis. So I feel like I should be someone that gets into that, but I just don't because I'm more interested in just like getting into the art itself. And it sounds like we're in the same camp there, at least a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. But Erica and Shadon and Brian, when he's involved, like they're all very good at that. I mean, I can listen to them because it's like watching Sports Center. Yeah, and these they know the numbers. They look at it from an analytical perspective, not a sports perspective. Ironically, invoking Sports Center, but you get my drift there.
I do.
And they're very good at that element of film and art. So they will be taking over Chasing the Gold. I'm very much looking forward to that. But you can go check out that episode. It was really great. But I wanted to bring up the Oscars, not just to selfishly plug another show of ours, but it was announced last week that at the ceremony this year, we will have past winners introducing current acting nominations, which I know they've done before, and I think that's a brilliant idea. I love that.
So I guess ABC has to stop trying to bring the show down to a condensed length now, right?
I mean, I don't know. It's so interesting because we talk about how the show needs to not be 6 hours long, but then we always introduce these ideas that would only prolong
I know.
ceremony. Like, let's add 2 new categories to the show.
One thing first off, that's great news, and we already talked about why that was. But with regard to bringing past winners to introduce the acting awards once again, which they did in 2008 and 2009, if I'm not mistaken. I think they did it both those times. And as far as I know, they haven't done it since. I did miss that. I'm glad they're bringing it back. I do wonder, are we only excited that we're seeing it again because it's been so long since they've done it? Which brings me to the question, do we want to see them do this same thing every single year going forward, or will it start to get stale? And I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it will or even it won't, but maybe there was some type of charm in only seeing this done maybe like every couple of years or something like that. But needless to say, seeing it come back just in general, I think is very exciting because I think there's something very like almost romantic about it. It gets back into the idea of respecting the art and the performer as opposed to just the statue that they're going to be getting at the end.
Absolutely. There's a reverence to it that I think is really interesting. And I do think it's something that we could do every year and not get stale. One, they have to introduce the nominees somehow.
They do. Yeah.
And is it more interesting to have past nominees come on stage and do it, or have some random celebrity come up there and read names off of a list? I mean, you have to do this every year.
It depends on how it's written, but at the same time, you make a good point.
So I feel like of the two options, I much prefer the romanticism angle.
Sure.
And I think it's neat to see the various acting winners get up on stage and partake in the ceremony in that way. Much of this will always come down to execution, but I don't think it has to be something that's dragged out. I don't think it has to be something where you're overly emphasizing it. Maybe this year you can because it's the first time you're doing it.
It's the first time they're doing it, in a long time. And one of the things that made it so interesting, at least the first time they did it, when I was looking back at the like for instance, Best Supporting Actor when Heath Ledger won posthumously, on that stage introducing the 5 nominees, you had like Alan Arkin, you had Kevin Kline, you had Cuba Gooding Jr., who are all very different vibes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is what made it fun, is having 5 individuals up there not really say the same thing at all. And you allowed them to basically act like themselves, which I thought was a really interesting way to not just pay tribute, but give it like this like tonal variety between all 5 presenters in that moment.
Yeah. I think maybe what I love about this the most, although I very much agree with everything that you said earlier about how romantic it is, but I think what is most compelling to me is that it is a counter to the whole idea of sports and rivalry, which is what it's been turned into with the audience, or at least with the vocal majority on social media.
All right, it's been 30 minutes. We're finally back to the topic. We do it every single episode, Jimmy. We find our way back to your soapbox. Everyone, if you haven't turned this into a drinking game yet, you're not doing it right.
Okay, but
I'm facetious. I love hearing this from you.
For real though, you get 5 other winners up there, and you're showing reverence to others that have won these various categories. You're showing a unification. It's demonstrating what the Oscars should be in terms of celebrating art.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these artists. Right. And you're bringing up 5 previous winners as a celebration, as a way to illustrate unity. It is a punch to the face of sports and rivalry, which should not be a part of art.
Yeah.
So that to me is what I love about this idea.
And I would love to see them do this more often, but it doesn't always have to be the acting categories. And I'm glad to see it this way again, but maybe the next year they do this for some of the tech awards, including Best Screenplay and Best Director. And
you can switch it around a little bit.
Yeah. And that just adds some level of excitement and unpredictability when you compare it to past shows. So then that way you almost can guarantee that the structure of last year's show is not going to be the same as the structure of this year's show.
Fight against staleness in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And to your point, continuing to celebrate the art of film, it's not just the face that's on screen that you're recognizing. It's those behind the camera at the same time too. So some years it might be a bit more focused on that. So then a general audience member watching the Oscars might think, oh yeah, I guess these directors are kind of well-known people, aren't they? Like maybe I should be paying attention to what they do as filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that idea. I'm curious what it's going to be like in execution. And while part of the reservation of adding elements like this or adding more categories is that you're going to prolong the telecast in that regard. But I much prefer seeing something like this than these random gags that add very little value to the ceremony. Sometimes it can bring a fleeting laugh, but I much prefer the celebration and showcasing the artistry than these dumb gags that don't need to be part of. Like, if you remove all of that, the opening monologue can stay. I think that's very fair, and it's a great way to open up the Oscars or any awards ceremony. The monologue can stay, but after that, I think the host should just be moving along the show and allow the artistry to be front and center, whether it be the songs or something like this, where you're bringing up all these Oscar noms, montages, things that evoke what we love so much about this art form.
Yeah.
Like, that should be what is highlighted.
Yeah,
And
I'm with you.
If I was in charge, that's what I would be doing.
No, I think that'd be great. Yeah, I'd watch that. I mean, I'm going to watch it regardless, but I enjoyed it more.
At any rate, I am looking forward to seeing how all of that plays out next week. We will, of course, be talking about the Oscars on next week's show. We'll give our thoughts on the winners and what happens. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another La La Land incident. Who knows? Can't wait.
It'd be funny if it was somehow between Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Well, I joked on Chasing the Gold. I think it would be hilarious if Bradley Cooper gets completely overlooked all season, but gets his revenge with Best Picture. And Maestro wins Best Picture. Could you imagine?
It's not going to happen, but man, it'd be a talking point. We all know
so
Oppenheimer is winning Best Picture.
No, it's a lot of the categories are locked up. There's two races that are compelling and open at the moment.
Yeah, but I'm looking at the nominees right now. I mean, I guess Best Actress in a Leading Role is still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, that one's 50-50. We talked about that one.
Yeah, I'm still betting on Lily Gladstone if I had to pick one of the two stones. My hunch is that it's going to go her way. Not opposed to that. That's just where I'm thinking. I mean, we all know it's going to be Oppenheimer. It's going to be Christopher Nolan. It's going to be Robert Downey Jr. I think it's going to be Cillian Murphy at this point. Screenplay. I know I wasn't planning on giving predictions, but we're already kind of talking about it, and I have the nominations in front of me, so I just figured I'd go right to it and just just spitball where I think it's going.
Okay.
Original screenplay, I think, will be going to Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah.
And adapted screenplay, I kind of think it's going to go to American Fiction.
Yeah, it's Cord Jefferson all the way.
Yeah,
the dude hasn't lost. He hasn't
lost, and even away from that, like sometimes you can. I feel like original screenplay is one of the easiest categories to predict, even if you have none of the stats behind it, because you just have to look at which one has the most potential for quotable dialogue. They usually vote for that one, and I feel like that's not to knock American Fiction. I actually think it's a pretty well written film overall, but I feel like that's the one that maybe most qualifies in that regard. Like it's just the dialogue is such a character in that movie.
That category to me is so funny. It is hilarious because that's a category that features Barbenheimer, the defining facto of last year. It also features the Zone of Interest, which is going to destroy international feature. Like they've already inscribed the Zone of Interest on the Oscar.
Oh yeah.
So you have these huge hitters that are nominated for Best Picture, and that category is not even a competition. It's American Fiction. Like it's so funny to me.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Like in the middle of the ceremony, because screenplay is fairly early in the ceremony, if I'm not mistaken. If it does end up also going to Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, all of a sudden you start thinking, wait a minute. Could this be a record-setting night for Oppenheimer?
Yeah. If he steals that category, I think it will be.
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think. I mean, Oppenheimer could be close, but I don't think it's going to be another one of those cases of we've tied Lord of the Rings, Ben-Hur, and Titanic for most Oscar wins. I don't think Oppenheimer is going to be that film. But if it wins Best Screenplay that night, pending the order and how some of the other tech categories work out, it could change our tune if it does that. Yeah,
it could. We shall see. But I'm with you. I think Cord Jefferson wins specific
Yeah,
category.
I'd say the other category that's probably the most exciting because I have no idea where it's going to go is best animated film.
Yeah, that's my favorite category this year. I talked about that on Chasing the Gold too, because I'm very much known for original score. That's usually my favorite category. That one is very much locked up this year.
It is.
And deservingly so. Love Goranson's score. But animated is my favorite. One, it has my favorite nomination of nomination morning in Robot Dreams.
Yep.
That came out of nowhere. I was really hoping that it could slide in there, somehow sneaks in. Very exciting.
Yeah.
And then you have two incredible movies, two top tier movies of the year fighting out for that award. And while I love Across the Spider-Verse, that was, the higher of the two for me on my top 10 list. I mean, the disparity between them, even on my own list, is so excruciatingly small.
Yeah, it's
it's so tiny.
Yeah.
And The Boy and the Heron might be the last opportunity for Miyazaki. I mean, we don't know, but it could be. And it's such a legacy movie. We talked about how that movie it's a Miyazaki buffet. For him to win for that, I think would just be appropriate.
It would be. And I think that's why The Boy and the Heron might be my prediction. And it's kind of similar to when someone like Martin Scorsese wins Best Director for The Departed. But the difference would be, what if he actually won Best Director for The Irishman? Because that movie was kind of about his legacy, right? And that's where I think the Miyazaki of it all with The Boy and the Heron gives him kind of an edge. I feel like the narrative there gives him an edge, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to Spider-Verse, honestly. Like it's any one of the two.
Either one will be great for sure. Yeah. But any other category you want to mention real quick?
I was just going to focus on those at the at the spur of the moment kind of thing.
Sure. Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned Robot Dreams because apparently that movie's coming to my city pretty early. Actually, I think they're doing a special Wednesday night screening that I'm going to try and catch this month. Hopefully, it's not when we're recording a podcast, but I'll let you know if that ends up being the case.
We can work around it. But great movie. Oh my gosh, love that.
Yeah,
we will have more thoughts on the Oscars next week, of course, in a reactionary episode.
Yep.
All right, Brendan, we need to talk about something very exciting, right?
Oh, yeah?
The Oscars are coming up very soon.
They are, that's true.
Weekend. And now there is a way to bet directly on the Oscars.
Oh, you don't say.
And that's why we needed to talk about Kalshi. This is very excited. It's founded by two MIT engineers. It is the first legal financial exchange in the U.S. where you can bet on any event. It is basically like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, but instead of investing in stocks, you can invest in things you care about or know about. The exchange has hundreds of thousands of users and has already seen more than $500 million of trading. Kalshi has a ton of Oscars market where you can make money by betting on the movies and actors you're most excited about. You can trade on things like, will Oppenheimer win Best Picture? Will Emma Stone win Best Actress? Will Christopher Nolan win Best Director? And of course, many of the other categories as well.
Yeah, and I think some of those, the odds might be in your favor, which means you might need to take advantage of this. But it does work very simply. So let's say, for instance, yet another category. Let's say you think American Fiction is going to win Best Adapted Screenplay, and it most likely will, according to us here, if you listen to our thoughts. Let's say it's currently priced at 61%. You could buy shares of that film, American Fiction, for 61% or 61 cents each. The price changes based on what the market thinks the odds are. So you got to be keeping up with the market data there. But let's say you want to buy 100 shares, you pay whatever that price is, you get that dollar amount. And if it wins, you get that full amount. If it doesn't win, you get nothing. Much like how sports betting more or less plays out. Exactly. You can also sell those shares before the results come in and kind of gain some traction in that way. But it's a very fascinating tool, turning art into sports in a fun way that we aren't against.
I was going to say, if you're going to be betting on the Oscars or treating it as sports, you might as well be able to bet like it is sports. So
yeah, exactly.
But Kalshi has many more markets, including Rotten Tomato scores. That's something that you can invest in here as well. There's markets in politics, music, climate, economics, tech, games, and of course, so much more. It's the only place where you can bet on the Oscars in all 50 states. All 50 states. And for me living in Florida, that is very exciting because sports betting is very new in Florida and it's quite limited. There's only so much you can do. I always get envious when my friends in Canada or, of course, in Nevada, when they can do so much more with sports, and I'm just stuck here doing the simple things. So this is exciting. I can partake in this.
Absolutely.
So if you want to join the Kalshi movement, you can sign up using our link. Go to kalshi.com/InSessionFilm, and the first 500 traders will get a free $20 credit. That is very important. Use our link and you'll get a free $20 credit. That is kalshi.com, KALSHI. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll, of course, have it listed before. If you're just listening to the show, KALSHI, kalshi.com/InSessionFilm. The first 500 traders will get a free $20 credit, and we thank Kalshi for their support. All right, Brendan, let's talk about coffee. It is one of my favorites.
We need to.
I need it. I drink it every single day. And what I love about Coffee Cult is that they give you the best coffee. They are not concerned about selling you $12 drinks. You don't need a $12 coffee drink. You don't.
And how many of those coffee drinks are actually coffee drinks?
Well, that's the thing, right? Because if you're buying a $12 coffee drink, you're not buying coffee. You're buying milk and sugar and chocolate and caramel and all of these other things you don't need.
With maybe a little bit of caffeine in there.
Maybe a little bit of caffeine on the side.
Yes, I guess it's got some properties of coffee, but is it coffee? That's a debatable notion.
And look, some of these companies, they want to give you mediocre coffee so that you'll put in all of those things and get a $12 drink.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been someone that loved my coffee black. And that's my preference.
Coffee. You don't need it. And here's the irony of that, Brendan. When you drink great specialty grade coffee, and you certainly know this,
absolutely.
I know this, you will get exquisite notes of caramel, chocolate, vanilla, citrus fruit. Like all of that is there naturally, organically in the coffee when you have the right coffee.
Yep, exactly.
Which is why we love Coffee Cult, because they source only specialty grade coffee and from all over the world. They roast to order, so it's guaranteed fresh every single time you get it. It's all ethically sourced as well. And it's really great, whether you get the single origins or a blend. One of my favorite blends that they have that I've been drinking a lot of lately is iCracker. Now,
interesting.
It is made to be an espresso coffee for those that like espresso. Now, I'm not much of an espresso guy. However, iCracker as an espresso is really strong. It's very, very textured. There's a lot of nuance to the iCracker espresso, but I'm not much of an espresso guy. I love a pour over. That's how I usually make my coffee, as a pour over. iCracker as a pour over,
heaven.
Brilliant. It is heaven because, again, you get these wonderful notes of lemon and cherry and caramel, and it is so good. It is so
great.
good.
It's almost midnight now. I want some coffee.
It's just amazing. And again, like I get all of that without having to add those artificial flavors to the coffee. It's amazing. So you need to go check these guys out. That's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that's ISF. You'll get 15% off your order. That is coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. Okay, let's move on to our top 5 lists this week. We haven't done a top 5 list in quite a while, so this is a fun change of pace.
We've been too busy with movie drafts.
We've done movie drafts and rankings and all kinds of fun things.
Yeah.
But we've done so many lists over the years before transitioning to this new format. It was something we did almost weekly for a long period of time before it became a little bit more sporadic. But love doing these top 5 lists. And as I noted earlier, we've never done a sci-fi movie list this broad before.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to diving into our top 5 sci-fi movies of the 21st century so far. Okay, so as we jump into this, I'm really curious, Brennan, because
got my trusted list right here.
well, and I wanted to ask you this, and I saved it for the show. I did not want to have this conversation beforehand. I wanted to get your true, honest reaction here.
Yeah.
Together on the show. So I have some criteria here, and as I was looking through my criteria, I was listing off movies that we've talked about several times before, that have been on many lists in the past. And I ended up with 5 movies that I crossed off as part of my criteria. So I wanted to ask, should I just do a true list? Should I go with my top 5 movies of this century so far, because I do have them? Or do I leave them off to talk about other movies that are great still, but maybe not as true?
Well, I think that makes a great question there, because what we could do, and we've done something similar before, if I'm not mistaken, we'd basically spend our time talking about our top 5s that aren't true lists, but then we'd have our true list at the end as far as what it would be, and we can reveal that after the fact. Because I think you make a great point. Many of these films that would populate both of our lists on a true list, they're not only ones we've talked about before, but some of them fall on our lists of favorite movies of all time, and we usually try to avoid that when we can. Just opening the door for certain movies that we certainly have talked on the show about, but not as often. Like, there's one movie in particular I have on my list that I think, you know what? I think I at least want to acknowledge this one. This is kind of a weird one. And then I think with sci-fi, this is a great category to get a little weird. So
Yeah.
I guess that's my long-winded way of answering your question. Let's have a true list at the end, and we'll do our semi-true list.
Semi-true list?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are some heavy hitters here that
My
we
B team.
Yeah, because I'm my actual top 5 that I want to talk about. 3 of them, I don't think I should. Maybe 4 of them, I don't think I should, actually. So just, yeah.
Okay. And that's interesting, because I have a 5 here that I went back and forth on. I was teeter-tottering on so many movies, because there were a few that I wanted to include here, even on my B list, if you will. The top 5 I would go with given my criteria. And I was going to substitute some of them out just to include films that I love that I wouldn't include on a true list, but I think would just be fascinating for this conversation.
Well, that's what I'm thinking too. There's at least 1 or 2 where I'm like, these are interesting movies that I think we need to at least acknowledge. So I feel like sci-fi is the genre to get a little wonky with it. So I kind of I think this will be fun to kind of go that route. And then at the end, we'll reveal what our actual top 5s would have been if we were to do this as true as possible. Like, if we were guesting on someone else's show and they had no criteria, what would my top 5 be? Like looking at it in that way.
Okay. I think this is going to be fun then.
Yeah.
As we start, do you want to reveal your criteria? What are the films that you are leaving off?
Well, if I reveal my criteria, then I'm basically revealing most of my top 5. Yeah. So okay. I mean, maybe that's what we do. Do we want to do this now then? I'm okay with that.
We can save it for the end. That's perfectly fine. I will just note up front, aside from the movies I left off, I did not include animation here. Animation got a little tricky because depending on the film and how you want to articulate it, so many movies could qualify as sci-fi. And
that's fair.
That would complicate this list for me further. The one that comes to mind, the most immediate and most conventionally, would be WALL-E. But I think there's quite a few other sci-fi movies, quote unquote sci-fi, that could be tethered to animation that there's like a gray area I didn't really want to grapple with. So I just left it off altogether.
I think that's fair. I would say WALL-E seems to be one that's a bit more literal in terms of its sci-fi categorization. But a few others, there is a bit of a looseness there. You're not wrong.
Yeah. So I just avoided animation altogether. There's clearly several animated films that belong in the conversation here. I want to acknowledge that up front. I'm just leaving it off, for the sake of cogency here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this will be interesting then.
All right. So let's jump into this. And even as we go, I'm still wondering if I'm going to flip flop on some of these picks.
Well, that's the thing. Like having a more, a more, what was the word I'm looking for? It's kind of a looser list in this regard, right?
It is
like,
a little looser. Yeah.
Yeah. Like not doing a true top 5. This is not really a ranked list for me. If anything, I'm kind of ranking it in the spur of the moment based on, okay, do I think this film is maybe better than this one? Do I think this film is more worth talking about in the world of science fiction? It's like it's kind of like in that kind of lens, I guess. But that's kind of fascinating. I'm okay to do it this way.
All right, let's jump into it then. What do you have at number 5?
So, okay, you'll know this is not a true list when I go with this film at my number 5. I'm going to go with Claire Denis' High Life.
Oh, okay. I will say that's probably my number 6 here.
Oh, good. Admittedly, it's a film I've only seen once, and it's that one time we reviewed it back in, what was this, 2018? Yes, 2018. And I think I articulated back then, I love this film, and I have no idea why. It has this weird exploration of abstinence, both familial and sexual. You know what I think it is as to why I really wanted to talk about it here? The best sci-fi movies for me are ones that feel like they don't just transport you to a new world and a new place, but they feel like they're teaching you something completely new. When you go back to revisit them, they almost become like completely new movies all over again. And I feel like High Life is a great example of that. It may not always work for certain people. There's one particular scene involving Juliette Binoche I know is not going to work for a lot of people.
Yeah, what a great moment that is.
Oh man, but this is a very unsettling film. It really is, and there's a tenderness to it as well, especially with Robert Pattinson front and center, and some of the more the infant dynamics, I'll simply say, I think are really great. So it's a film I have yet to fully unpack, but I do think it really fits the realm of why science fiction is perhaps the most fascinating and interesting genre of film. And ironically, Claire Denis refuses to call this a sci-fi film. She has a very cynical. No, but that's like in a weird way, her stance on the movie just adds to the like the sci-fi nature of it in a weird way. So it's like I love that. So I can't articulate all that well why I really like this movie, but it's the vibe. It's the vibe that I think is really worth dissecting.
Yeah, no, it's really great. I certainly love its tonal disparities and variances throughout the film. The performances are great. Love Claire Denis, but that is very much a sci-fi movie.
It is
almost every sense of the word. But it's incredible. It's not for everybody. It's very methodical, very ruminative, which I really love. And you're right, there is so much to parcel out of it, but the thing that always sticks to me, and forgive me, I can't remember the character's name that Robert Pattinson plays, but we come to learn about the character that he's on this ship because of an act of violence that he had committed.
Yeah.
And so he's on this ship as a result of committing that violence.
Yeah.
Only for him, through the experiences he has, to regain his humanity through fatherhood that comes about by being on that ship.
Yeah. His name was Monty, by the way.
Monty.
Yeah.
And that polarity, I think, is incredible. It is incredible. And I don't know if that was the main thematic through line that Claire Denis was going for there. I don't really know. But I do think there is something profoundly relatable there in terms of how fatherhood changes who you are at your very core.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of what we do see in that film
Yeah.
with Monty. And it is incredible to see the evolution of the character in that regard.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating movie. I do love it as well. Not quite on my list here, but it's one that I thought about quite a lot. And honestly, I switched it out because of everything we had said earlier in terms of wanting to talk about other films that maybe I've talked about a little bit less. Not that I've talked about High Life all that much, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows? I mentioned I might change this list as we go, and I might just throw it on here later.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean, mine might change as well depending on what you pick. You may have something at your number, whatever, and it's like, you know what? I'm adding that to my list now. Thank you for that one.
But I love High Life. I have a true top 5 that I mentioned earlier that is in my criteria.
Same.
On a true list, though, on a true top 10, I probably make room for High Life in that 6 through 10.
Okay.
I love it that much. I think it is that great. I
very
didn't
good
really wrestle with that specifically, but I think it's there, or it's very much in that conversation at the very least.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, for my number 5, honestly, this is a very similar film tonally, structurally, poetically, although it doesn't take place in space. But at my number 5 is Kogonada's After Yang.
Okay, I figured this was going to be one you brought up. Yeah.
But similarly, it's this movie that is ruminative, takes its time. It has this incredible pathos at its core. And I heavily responded to its ideas on grief and loss. Obviously, I talked about this quite a bit. Not this last year, but the year before when it came out. It made my top 10 of 2022. And what I love so much about this movie is that it forces you to think about memory in a way that maybe you haven't before. Because there's a moment in the film, I believe the character's name is Jake, that Colin Farrell plays, where Jake has to look at Yang's memories. And he starts to cherish the memories that Yang had saved, because he could only save a few, Yang being this AI robot. And he could only save like 10 memories or something to that effect. And it's fascinating to think about that regarding our own humanism in the sense that if you had the ability to only save 10 memories of your entire lifetime, which ones would you choose? Like, that to me is a profound question that I don't know if you can answer honestly, because it's impossible to choose. But those are the questions that the film is provoking that I find so incredible. And in addition to its general, emotional through lines on grief and how the characters respond to that here, it's just an incredible movie that I love. But it just has so many layers. For my money, I still maintain the best score of that year.
It's a beautiful movie. It's a very
so
ethereal
gorgeous
and tender movie. I'm glad we're at least representing something that fits into the realm of artificial intelligence, because that's a very common theme when it comes to sci-fi now. Not even sci-fi. It involves real fi. Right? It's real fi. It's fact. It's science fact. It's not just science fiction anymore. Because I'm sure other movies that we're choosing to leave off these lists that would populate our true list would also fall into that same kind of idea, right? We won't get into those. We'll save those later, but you know where I'm going with that, right? But I'm glad we're at least talking about the subject here, because it has such a place in science fiction, stemming all the way back to not just Blade Runner, but even movies like Metropolis. Like the idea was always there. So it's such a fundamental building block of science fiction.
Absolutely. Do love it. All right, what do you got at number 4?
Great question, because I'm kind of thinking of changing this mid. You know what? I'm going to go a little commercial here. For my next one, I'm going to go with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
A little Dawn.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is my favorite of the 3 in this new trilogy, and primarily because the work it most reminded me of is probably my favorite science fiction novel of all time. So you've heard of Ender's Game by Orson Scott
For
Card,
sure.
I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Well,
movie that came out in 2013, I believe it was, not great. I haven't read the novel. I like the film okay, but what I remember most about it is Steve Jablonsky's score, which is very Transformers-y, but I loved it.
It is. I will say narratively, the movie is pretty faithful to the book. It captures a lot of the same thematic intent and is pretty committed to that, which I did appreciate. It's not the greatest of movies as it being a movie, but at least narratively it supports the novel in a lot of good ways. But that novel that Orson Scott Card wrote, it has a sequel called Speaker for the Dead, which he always intended to be like the main story he always wanted to tell about Enderwiggin. If anything, I think Ender's Game actually started off as kind of a prologue to Speaker of the Dead, then that he just had so much material that it turned into a novel in and of itself and became such a classic. But Speaker for the Dead is a much denser story, really about cultural unity, is basically what that story is ultimately about. And the idea of conflict forming between nations simply because you refuse to listen to each other. And that's kind of the thematic intent of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes specifically. And the irony that the main rift actually is between the same species. It's not just humans versus apes. It proves that big movies like this that are meant to be money grabbers can actually be complicated and test the audiences in a very interesting way. So I really love that. I mean, the movie's great on its own terms, just given the performative nature of it with Andy Serkis and Toby Kebbell as Caesar and Koba respectively. But I think the thematic underbelly of that movie is really fascinating. It gets a lot of credit, but sometimes I don't even think it gets enough credit. It's a very challenging movie and really set the stage for what these blockbusters could do. So I wanted to represent it in that way because I do think it is a genuinely challenging movie, as sci-fi movies should be.
I love that entire trilogy. I
Sure,
have stated this on the show, and I still firmly believe it is one of the best trilogies, regardless of type, that we've seen over the last 30 years or so. It is remarkable. Even that first film, I think, is quite good. I know people immediately go to Dawn and War, but I think Rise is almost as good. You can certainly tell the directional disparities, but the emotional core that you very much get in the latter two is foundational to the first film. I think people forget that.
Yeah,
It's very
set the
much
stage
there.
very well.
Set the stage extremely well. The stakes and the scope become amplified in the latter two, which isn't a fault of the first film. It has to set the stage, but I think that's maybe why people look at it as lesser. But that whole trilogy is great. Dawn is phenomenal. I love War as well. Completely with you there.
Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff.
All right, for my number 4, I'm going to lose some of you here, and that's fine. Perfectly fine. All I ask is that you hear me out. You can disagree, maybe vehemently disagree. That's perfectly understandable. All I ask is that you cordially just stick with me.
I'm excited now.
Allow me to articulate why I think Star Wars The Force Awakens is maybe the second best Star Wars movie.
Oh, there it is. I'll be right back. I mean, I love it too. So you're not going to lose me too much, but man, this is going to be fun.
I love this film. Now, I know Star Wars in general is extremely polarizing these days. Extremely polarizing. However, I do think The Force Awakens is one of the best films we've seen in that franchise. And a lot of it comes down to how JJ taps into mythos and memory. What he does to subvert familiar Star Wars ideas and tropes while embracing the fundamental nature of what makes Star Wars what it is, I think is truly incredible. Underrated filmmaking in that franchise. And I think too often the conversation gets lost in its very superficial, fundamental story beats and how it mirrors the first one. And the more I watch that movie, the more I actually love that about the film, because it allows JJ to reiterate that pulling of the rug that he does all the more.
Well, and it kind of almost deconstructs his own obsession with myth in some ways, right?
Yes.
And I think that, yeah, the film does a really good job looking at nostalgia as myth and legend. Like that, those elements, especially at first, I think are really fascinating in that movie.
I agree. But that whole movie, The Force Awakens, it sets itself up to follow a familiar beat so that way you don't have to think about plot. I think it is extremely intentional. And honestly, I think it's borderline brilliant because we're not really supposed to keep up with new trajectories and what's going on over here, what's this politic, and how is it affecting these new characters that I don't know. By keeping the fundamental dramatic beats familiar, it allows us to get to know these new characters in a way that I think is very important, especially for establishing this new trilogy.
Yeah.
And how that affects the legacy characters that become involved in this as well.
Yeah.
And the subversion that's at play. So what we get as a result, for example, is not Darth Vader. We get a kid that thinks he's Darth Vader, that is trying to carry the facade of a Darth Vader, but emotionally, spiritually, he isn't anywhere near the prowess of a Darth Vader. He's a child. He is still very much maturing, which has vulnerabilities in the character, which is why Rey is able to take advantage of him at times. I love how it is completely antithetical to what Darth Vader is supposed to be. Adam Driver, of course, recently talked about this when he was promoting Ferrari.
Yeah.
And talking about how that was absolutely an intentional choice. They wanted to essentially have the reversal arc of what you got with Darth Vader in the original trilogy. But beyond that, and I love that. And Kylo Ren is such a fascinating character. And I think that the gimmick of him is really great. The subversion of him is even better. And how that tethers to Han Solo is easily one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Star Wars arcs in the whole entire franchise. Because Han Solo, when we first meet him, we're reminded of the familial. That's what JJ wants to do. He wants to remind you of something that you already know. Whether it be Kylo Ren and the aesthetic or the superficial plot beats. The first time we meet Han Solo, it's Han Solo. It's the scoundrel that we know.
Yeah.
But that is quickly ripped away. And Han Solo in that film isn't a scoundrel. That's not who he is now.
He's a broken dad.
He's a broken father.
Yeah.
Desperate to get his son back. And how that comes about between him and Leia, I think is absolutely incredible. And of course, it leads to that great moment there on the bridge between the two of them. So like that to me is the beating heart of The Force Awakens. And it doesn't get enough credit because it's J.J. Abrams and people get caught up in the lens flares and the filmmaking tricks that, defines him for better or worse. But I think that film is equally as subversive as anything you get with Rian Johnson. And I know Rian Johnson is the subversive guy. That's what we love about him. That's what we talk about with Rian Johnson. And that's a fair conversation to be had.
Yeah.
But I think people need to start looking beyond those superficialities because very objectively, those subversions are there in The Force Awakens equally as much. It's the difference between them is that it's different. They do it in different ways.
They do it in different ways, which is why I still stand by that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi do work really well together as this sort of yin and yang.
Agree.
Yeah, and the more we talk about it, the more
fascinating
time
yin
has
and yang.
gone on. Yeah, it makes me appreciate those two films working together. The fact that they superficially, as you're saying, don't really work together is kind of why they do work together, because those clues were there in The Force Awakens. It's just that movie was very superficially about myth and legend in a way that J.J. Abrams loves. He loves the nostalgia. He loves going for those things, but the movie is meant to deconstruct those things. So then The Last Jedi comes around to literally and physically break those barriers down. So it's making that even more literal. Just like those two films work so well together. I just think, like, how could you have turned that into a trilogy? I don't know. I think we often say the final movie in that trilogy should have been some way to bridge the gap a little bit, but I'm not even sure if that would have been possible. Like, if anything, The Last Jedi ends in a way that could have ended that trilogy.
Honestly, I think you could have ended there, and it would have been a great double feature, I guess.
Honestly, yeah. Or I mean, a lot happens in The Last Jedi that you could have broken that into. I don't even want to say two movies, but if you found like a middle point between those two narrative threads of those two movies and made that like its own movie, and then you had 3 movies of those, like that whole thing, that's a pretty interesting trilogy right there, if you ask me.
I agree. And honestly, at the same time, I don't think it has to be overly complicated, because I think what's brilliant about both movies is how they set up the new characters and how they, in these very subversive ways, again, whether it be Han Solo in Force Awakens or Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, regardless of which one it is, those characters are handled in very different ways. They are ultimately 2 very different characters.
Yeah.
Which is, again, ironic why the discourse, I think, has gone a little crazy over Luke. Either way, that is how these 2 films treat those characters while setting up Rey and Finn and Kylo. I think the third film, simply you focus on the relationship between Finn and Rey, and you completely turn Kylo dark. That's it. Because that is the meeting of the middle of those 2 movies. It really didn't need to be that hard, especially because Rey and Finn are separated in The Last Jedi. Again, I don't know if that wholly works for me, but regardless, an easy fix there is to bring them together, as we saw in The Force Awakens, while continuing the trajectory of Kylo that was brought in The Last Jedi. And this isn't that hard.
It's not that hard.
Really not that difficult.
I knew The Rise of Skywalker was in trouble when they announced the movie during, I think, Star Wars Celebration, and J.J. Abrams was trying to promote it as basically what we wanted to give you was a straight up adventure film. These 3 characters on a grand adventure together. My thought was, wait a minute, it seems a little late to do that. Like I feel like that should have been that should have been saved for another movie. I think you lost your chance there, buddy. And he kind of did.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate, but
it is.
And the reason because I love both of these movies as well, but I specifically bring up The Force Awakens because, one, I might slightly prefer it because of the pathos at the core of that film and everything we see with Han there.
It's a better movie than The Last Jedi. There are just times the deconstructionist approach to The Last Jedi makes me appreciate it more as a Star Wars movie, if that makes sense. But I think the way it flows, the Force Awakens is a much tighter movie for sure.
But similarly, the deconstructionist angle is what I love about The Force Awakens.
But it's more cryptic in that movie. I feel like you have to look for it, which is actually something I really do like about The Force Awakens. It's the irony is that I know some people that criticize The Force Awakens for being too similar to A New Hope. It's like, I mean, it is, but then you're kind of missing the point if that's all you think it is.
Yeah.
It's like there's more to it than just that.
And I don't even know how subtle it is. And maybe in hindsight, I'm giving it more credit than it is.
I think maybe it's subtle comparatively to The Last Jedi.
And that's true. I would very much agree with. But I love its subversions, its emotion, of course. And I just want to champion it because I feel like it gets so much less love than The Last Jedi.
It's a very good movie.
When I think it's equally as good. And for me, it's the second best Star Wars movie, I think. I would have it too on my list.
It's not that high for me. Then again, I'm also someone that has Return of the Jedi at number 2, and I know most people wouldn't have it that high. And that's
probably my number 3. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, good man. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's a very underrated Star Wars movie, if you ask me. It sounds like Empire Strikes Back is still number 1.
Yeah. No question. Anyone that doesn't have that number 1, you just move on with your
I know
day.
some people that have the first Star Wars at number 1. I can understand that, honestly. I don't agree, but I can understand why someone would have it.
You're more open-minded than me. No, I'm just kidding. It is a great experience. It changed film in many regards. I do get it, but I do think it is a much lesser film for sure. But still good.
I don't necessarily need to see Mark Hamill complaining about Tashi Station and power converters.
Yeah. The writing and the performances aren't great. It gets much better as it goes, but that first one is a little rough at times.
Yeah, for sure.
A little rough at times. But yeah, I agree with you. Return of the Jedi is great. That's my number 3. I will champion that one all day as well.
Great stuff.
Well, we're talking about sci-fi movies of the 21st century.
Yeah.
So The Force Awakens is
man. Of course, you open up the door with Star Wars, you're gonna find a rabbit hole. You're going to find a Sarlacc pit to go down.
So here we are. Anyway, on to your number 3.
Oh, my number 3. Okay. So I'm not changing things yet. For my number 3, I'm going to go to one that this is a film I just like to champion because it's my favorite of this particular filmmaker, and most people don't cite it as one of his best. I'm going to The World's End. Edgar Wright.
Oh, I was wondering if you were going to have this on your list.
Because I love this movie.
Yeah, I know you love this movie.
Yeah. Well, this is my favorite Edgar Wright film. And it's hard to explain why. Maybe I just appreciate the the subtleties of it when compared to the extreme nature of Hot Fuzz, which doesn't always work for me. But there's something about The World's End that just balances its usual Edgar Wright humor, but with this really heavy dose of depression. It's a very depressing movie. And the way it treats these characters' hometown. For me, I often think about how my hometown, when I go back to visit my parents, or I say my old high school, for instance, the town hasn't really changed at all. Even many of the people there are still the same. A lot of the people I graduated with, they stayed put. They haven't left. And it's kind of like how Newton Haven is the name of the town that they're visiting here, or that they grew up in The World's End. It's like this desperate attempt to preserve what used to make life so perfect back then. It has this interesting idea front and center that I weirdly can relate to. I don't know if everyone can relate to it, but I kind of can, given the sense of place of it all. So it's a film that's always stuck with me for those reasons. And I also just think it's weirdly entertaining, a weirdly entertaining movie. So I always like to champion it. I think it's Edgar Wright's best film. So just wanted to throw that out there. I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback from the Scott Pilgrim fans, or the Hot Fuzz fans, or the Shaun of the Dead fans. And I like those movies as well. But this one has always stuck out for me. It really has. I really love it.
Yeah, no, this is a great movie as well. I do really like it. I love the entire Cornetto trilogy. Edgar Wright is a filmmaker I do really appreciate. And this one is underappreciated. I do agree. It didn't quite hit the zeitgeist in the same ways that Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead did. And I don't really know why, because I think it's just as good.
Well, I think timing may have had something to do with it. It also came out the same year as This Is the End, another World's End themed movie of sorts. So perhaps, marketing wise, it got a little lost in the shuffle. But even tonally, it doesn't have the same spoof-like nature as Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead did. Those two films, it was clear what it was kind of riffing on, what genres and what types of movies it was riffing on. Mm-hmm. The World's End, it's not really. I mean, it's clear, but it's also not. It's kind of its own beast within the Cornetto trilogy, which is something I really appreciate about it. But I think it made maybe fans of those films, it made it harder to categorize for them. And I guess maybe that's why it's seen as the lesser. I don't know. I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And maybe because it came out late in the summer that year.
Yeah.
I want to say an August release, if I remember.
I think so. Maybe in September, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah. It was certainly later on in the year, after This Is the End had already come out.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's, ironically, the sci-fi nature of it and how bizarre the film is. Maybe the marketing just didn't hit people. I don't really know.
Yeah. And you're right. It looks like August 23rd is when it came out.
Yeah.
So
So, which is a weird release date. Usually that's
It is. Yeah, that's kind of that's the
it's a
summer
dumping
dumping ground. That's the summer version of January.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a weird release in that regard, but I think it's great though. I do hope people come around on it. I'm waiting for, because we live in a world where these films are often revisited and they gain a cult status or some sort of new invigoration. I'm waiting for The World's End to have that experience.
I really hope it does. I really do.
Okay. For my number 3, I don't know if I need to spend too much time here, but similarly to The Force Awakens, I wanted to have this film on my list because it's often looked at as lesser, this filmmaker. It's also a remake of a prolific filmmaker that people really love.
All right, let's get your Soderbergh on.
Let's get a little Soderbergh on here. Yeah, Solaris.
Yeah.
This is my number 3 here.
This is a JD pick right here.
Yeah. No, now this, similarly to After Yang, or not After Yang, maybe After Yang. I mentioned it with High Life, though. This would probably be on a true top 10 for me.
Okay.
On a true top 10. I love this film so much. I think it is really great. I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback for this as well, but I do think it's as good as Tarkovsky's.
It's a very different movie.
It is a very movie. It is very different. You're right.
Yeah.
And admittedly, it is a movie made for me in the sense that, okay, it has all of the sci-fi mechanics and tropes that I love. And, it's methodical. It takes its time. It does channel a Tarkovsky that is certainly missing in a lot of Soderbergh's other movies. But like a Soderbergh, it has a very charismatic central performance, and it has an emotional core that is not in Tarkovsky's movie. Tarkovsky wasn't interested in sentimentality.
Right.
But Soderbergh does bring a pathos to this film that speaks to me. So it has all of the cinematic language that speaks to me and the emotional language that speaks to me. That is all here, while, of course, traversing the same heartbreaking and tragic and profound questions that you get in the Tarkovsky version. The whole idea of experiencing someone that you thought had passed on, getting to relive moments with them again. Like, how would you react to that? I think is really great. And I think handled with such diligence in this film, still thoughtful, still very provocative. And ultimately goes in a very different territory, especially in that third act. It does get quite different.
Yeah.
And I think Soderbergh just absolutely nails it alongside George Clooney. So
it's a very good movie. It's a very short movie. Like, it's an easy watch. It's what, 90 some minutes long, when that's like what, an eighth of Tarkovsky's film. Yeah, it's a little facetious, but it's a lot shorter than that.
Yeah, but it's recontextualized in the right ways, I think. And given what we learn about the character and his home life and the relationship with his wife, I love how all of that culminates at the end of this movie.
It reminds me a lot of modern Soderbergh when he's kind of in this more experimental phase, making movies like Unsane and Kimmy. It just, like, it feels like a real precursor to that side of Soderbergh's career, which I think is really fascinating, and becomes a really good, almost tonal exercise, even though that's underselling it. There's a lot more going on here than just calling this a tonal exercise, but it just has such a weird vibe to it that allows itself to feel like its own thing and not just be a remake of a Tarkovsky film. So like, it functions in its own way, and I think it is a very good film. Yeah, perhaps one of Soderbergh's better films. Yeah, I'm not sure if I would disagree with that. Yeah,
it's certainly top 5 for me, maybe even top 3 Soderbergh.
Top 10. I don't know if it's top 5 for me, but the guy's a really interesting filmmaker. He's got a lot of interesting films up there.
He's got some great movies, and this one is near the top. I think this was in my top 5 for its year when we did that retrospective.
It was. I remember that. Yeah. Was that 2002?
Yeah, maybe at number 4 on my list that year. Maybe number 3. I can't remember. It was really high for me.
Okay.
I love it. Yeah, definitely one of my favorite Soderberghs, hands down.
Yeah, good stuff.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Number 2. What do you got?
Number 2. Oof. This is where it gets tricky because I'm actually thinking I might start swapping some of the. I've got like 7 movies I can equally talk about here.
For sure.
Yeah, that are just I think more interesting. Maybe just I'm gonna go with this movie because I know I know it's nowhere near your list, so it'll at least maintain variety here.
Okay.
And my number 2 is probably one that could even squeeze into my true top 5. It's certainly in my top 10. That's Steven Spielberg's Minority Report.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know you like this movie a little bit less than I do.
I do.
I think you like it more as kind of a thriller than anything else. I know you have a few issues with the screenplay, but I do think it is a very bleak and fascinating movie. I actually really respond to its depiction of the future, how everything actually looks very dilapidated. It's actually a very raw kind of visualization of the future, which is sort of interesting with a big movie like this, especially one from Steven Spielberg. You would kind of think that movies like this would have more of a cleanliness to the way it visualizes the future. Not necessarily that it's a good future. It could still be a bad future, but there's always something kind of glossy and pristine about it. Whereas Minority Report visually almost has a lot of similarities to something like Children of Men. And that bleakness really carries through tonally and emotionally for me, especially in Tom Cruise's pretty tragic performance by the time you get to the end. I think it's a really, really interesting movie about like what it means to visualize what the whole eye of the beholder kind of thing means. Like the way that we perceive things. And we sometimes tell ourselves we believe it simply because we see it when it's all about observation. I think some of those things are really interesting, very scary, very relevant. And I used to think the ending was kind of this Spielbergian cop-out, but I think it kind of maintains some of those themes a little bit further. I find myself not really sure if my allegiance is being torn by the time we get to that conclusion. So I think it's a pretty frightening movie. And it's always stayed with me. Like, this came out in 2002 as well, the same year as Solaris. And you had Solaris in your top 5. I had this in near my top 5. I think I had this at number 6 when we did our 2002 retrospective. But that was also the year of Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can, which did make my top 5. So it's a deep year, certainly a deep year there. But I do think Minority Report is a very bleak and edgy thriller, and I think it's held up pretty well for those reasons. It looks great. Movie still looks great for the most part.
Yeah.
A few wonky visual effects here and there, but I think it has a very like dirty kind of look, which I really love about it.
No, I do love the visual palette of the film. I mean, it's Spielberg, so it of course looks great for the most part.
Yeah.
My issue with the film is never the Spielberg of it all. I never
it's
doubt
the script,
Go
right?
Spielberg. Yeah, it is the writing of the film doesn't always land for me. The central conceit is compelling, but I think a little hollow in execution.
Okay.
And there's like some of the motivating factors for the character, I just don't think is fully realized. There's like 1 or 2 scenes dedicated to it, yet it's driving many of the choices he makes, and it just doesn't quite come together for me. But I do agree with you in terms of, whether it be the symbolism of the film or the action of the film, the
use of the eyes, I think, are really,
all of that is great. So ultimately, it's still a film I quite adore, or at the very least I'm entertained by. It doesn't quite reach top tier Spielberg for me. And again, not because of the Spielbergian of it all, just the writing isn't quite there for me.
I will say
it's still
this,
a very good movie.
I think if anything, I don't know if the script is really the strongest point of the film either. If anything, it might be the performances that give me some of those added layers to it. In particularly, Samantha Morton. I think if this were any other year, I would have said she needs to be nominated for Best Supporting Actress. I think she's that good in the movie. She makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up pretty much every time she speaks. I think she's really good in the movie.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, for my number 2, I'm excited for this because I've never really had an opportunity to put it on a list before, because
that's the beauty of this, man.
After Yang, it's relatively new-ish, and we haven't had an exercise where this could come up. At least I don't recall anyway. So if memory serves, this is the first time we've had it on a list here.
You're going something pretty new for your number 2.
Pretty new.
Okay,
2019.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I was gonna say because my number one is a pretty new one as well. But I was wondering if it was gonna be the same one.
No, I'm going with Ad Astra.
Okay, that makes sense. I actually thought this would have been one you left off. Okay.
No, love this movie. Absolutely adore it. As far as criteria, you mean?
Yeah, I thought this would have been one you left off. I thought this would have made like a true list for you easily.
Well, here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
Much like my criteria, like the films I left off, really had nothing to do with them being on a true list.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was more so we've talked about these films, or at least I've talked about these films
so many times.
Yeah. Like so many times. So it really had more to do with that than anything else. However, when you talk about movies that you love so many times, it's because you really adore those movies. They're really high on your list.
And then you start to run out of things to say about them.
Exactly. So it equates to being the same essentially in that, I've talked about those movies because I love them and they're really high on my list. So like of the 5, admittedly, one of them is maybe 6 on a true list.
Okay.
I don't know. I've wrestled with I've gone back and forth quite a bit, but 4 of the 5 that I left off per my criteria are absolutely without question on a true top 5 for me.
Yeah.
But I've had time to talk about them because they're not as new. Ad Astra, even if that was the 5th, if I replaced one of those in my criteria with Ad Astra, I've never talked about Ad Astra, as I noted. So I wanted to have the opportunity here. But yeah, love this movie. In my top 10 in 2019 when it came out. James Gray, man, he makes movies that I cannot stop thinking about. I
haven't loved all of his movies, but the ones I've loved, I really loved.
Yeah,
like this one, I really like. Lost City of Z is probably my favorite of his, still at this point. And even Armageddon Time, which I didn't fully love, I was still willing to defend because there were so many great things in it. Really, I think his only major misstep is The Immigrant. That's a film I still didn't. Maybe I should go back and rewatch.
And that film has its defenders. It's been a long time since I've seen that one too.
Yeah,
so it's hard for me to say.
Yeah,
that came out
go back
very early on in our tenure.
Yeah, we didn't know what we were talking about then. That's maybe 2015 at the very latest.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago. Not to say that I would necessarily change my tune. I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if I came around on The Immigrant because I've really liked him quite a bit.
I like Two Lovers quite a bit too. So he's a good filmmaker. He's a good filmmaker.
And I do agree Armageddon Time is lesser James Gray, but it's still a film I quite liked.
Yeah.
Ad Astra, The Lost City of Z, Two Lovers, though, I think are really great. Really, really great. Love those movies.
Yeah.
Ad Astra is my favorite of his, which is why it's on this list. And
it's a good movie.
It's also so different. I guess Lost City of Z has some similar comparisons to be had, but there's a poetry to Ad Astra that I did not see coming. I was knocked back by its Malikian sensibilities. The use of voiceover is just absolutely incredible in this film. I did wonder at times if Malick was involved with the movie. It's so good.
Yeah. Having Brad Pitt come back again, basically playing his O'Brien kind of role, I guess.
Yeah, it is a little tree of life having Brad Pitt in the film for sure. But the visuals of the film are really great. Max Richter, I tell you what, Max Richter and sci-fi,
they go hand in hand.
Are synonymous.
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
It is incredible. The work you and I have not talked about Spaceman yet, the Netflix film with Adam Sandler, but Max Richter scored that film, and I can't stop thinking about the score to that movie.
So we at least know the movie's not going to be bad.
Yeah,
just simply based on that fact.
Max Richter, he needs to do more movies. I don't know why he doesn't do more. I don't know what his schedule is or what holds him back from being a Hans Zimmer, but the man has a talent that, at least with sci-fi, is unmatched.
He does a lot of like his own pieces that are outside of film. Like I know like one of his most well-known pieces now is the one that's played in Arrival, but that was not even written for that film.
No,
like that was an existing piece, but it fits so well to your
that's
point.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Like he didn't even write that for Arrival, yet that piece of music will forever be synonymous with Arrival. Anytime you hear it, people will immediately think of Arrival, even if that's not the movie
funny.
you're watching.
It's the first time I heard it was in Shutter Island, of all things. But
nobody thinks about Shutter Island when they hear that music now.
No, I think it was better suited in Arrival. Yeah,
for sure. No, Denis Villeneuve has stolen that piece of music for sure.
Yeah.
But that is to say, like, regardless, what Max Richter wrote there was perfect for a sci-fi element such as Arrival. His score in Ad Astra is great, of course. Such a big part of it. There's such an exquisite rumination in Ad Astra that I didn't really expect, but I love what the film is going for in terms of its ideas of grief and anger and regret and love and everything we see there with the Brad Pitt character. And he won the Oscar for The Wrong Movie that year.
That was the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I see what you mean.
And look, I love him in that film. I love that movie on the whole. But I do believe that his performance in Ad Astra is the best of his career. That's the one I will champion.
Very contemplative performance. You don't see from him all that often.
There's this grounded stoicism that is really great, but he's also able to exude emotion in a way that is palpable at times. And I don't know, like I just don't think of Brad Pitt in that way.
I know.
You know, like
I don't think many people do.
His performances are so much louder. They're often funny, sometimes dramatic, but often he rides that line of drama and comedy extremely well.
Sure.
And so he's able to evoke some incredibly memorable performances, but none of this nature before.
Yeah.
And so I was just stunned by what he was able to do, you know, because it's not sentimental, but he finds like he's able to bring hope and closure to the character that I just love, especially at the end, that scene that we get there with the father.
Yeah.
And his reaction when his father tells him, "I didn't love you." Oh my God.
Yeah, it's not what you want to hear. It's not what you want to hear.
It is a brutal moment in this film and some of the best acting I've seen in the InSession film.
To travel across galaxies to be abandoned once again by your father. I don't know how you can survive that. That's an emotional blow.
Yeah, I truly don't know. Like, I don't know how this wasn't more of an Oscar player than the one he won the Oscar for. Every time I think about this performance and what he's asked to do, because he's doing so much more here than, you know, but it's not on the page. Like, it's all in his performance. Yeah. He's not reliant on a Quentin Tarantino who is known for writing great characters and great dialogue. James Gray doesn't quite have that reputation. God love him. And the character of Roy here, it's not on the page. It is all his performance, and it's Oscar worthy. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
It's really good. Really good stuff.
I love it.
I agree. He's really good in that movie.
Absolutely slayed me, that film and that performance.
Yeah. It's in my top 20 that year. I need to rewatch it.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about how I'd feel about it now.
Okay. Good stuff. What do you got at number 1?
Nope.
Nope.
Just Jordan Peele's Nope. That's my number 1.
Okay.
Yeah. I was trying to make a joke with that one by just going nope, but that didn't work out. I think the timing of there was just not fair. Anyway, Jordan Peele's Nope. Love this movie. So when you said that you were having something kind of contemporary for your next pick there, you said 2019. I was like, oh, I guess it isn't. I'm going with something very contemporary with my number 1 here with Jordan Peele's Nope, 2022. And this one gets better and better with me as time keeps going on for it. And when I say time going on, it's not even 2 years old at this point. But I feel like we're witnessing something pretty extra. What I love about this movie is the way it basically treats spectacle and also is spectacle. Like it's hard for a movie to be exactly what you're trying to criticize and to do it so well. And that's what I love so much about the film, is how it's able to do all of those things, and not just dissect the spectacle itself, but how we kind of obsess over it. Even the film's marketing was sort of trying to target us as cinematic theorists, right? Like there was a whole interview, this whole video that the cast did promoting the movie, looking at fan theories about what the movie was going to be about. And the movie was not any of those fan theories. And to be fair, some of those theories were actually really clever. But the movie was a lot more simplified than that. It didn't really dive into the whole mystery box thing as people were expecting. And it's kind of the point. Like, it kind of shows the obsessive nature of mystery box storytelling and how we create spectacle when it doesn't need to be created, and how certain demographics are then taken advantage to create that spectacle, as history has shown here in this movie. I think there's, that underlying message adds a lot of power as well. So there are a lot of layers to this movie that I'm discovering as time keeps going on, or really as the months keep going on. But I do think it is a very effective sci-fi film. As an action film, I think it's very thrilling as well. I cannot wait to see what Jordan Peele has up his sleeve next. Really great stuff.
Yeah, great movie. I love it as well. It's a movie that I keep thinking about and contemplating and wrestling with. Man, in a year full of great movies, this was just outside my top 10. But I do think it is Peele's best directed effort to date.
Sure.
I do agree with you. The spectacle of it all is engrossing. But I do love the writing of it as well. However, I will say this. I think this is as good a time as now to reveal that one of the films that I left out per my criteria was Get Out. And that is the Jordan Peele movie for me. And I don't know if that's the one in my criteria. I don't know if it would be on my true list, but worst case, it's number 6 or number 7. If we expand that out to a top 10. And I don't need to expound on that. We actually talked about that quite in depth in episode 569. If you recall, we did our top 10 Sundance movies.
Yeah, we did.
Kind of off that that list that they released. And that was one of the films that I brought up and talked about thoroughly about why I still think it's Peele's best movie, because it's a writing masterpiece.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
Of a written film.
Absolutely.
And but it's interesting to see that evolution, because like Us is like a marriage of his writing and his direction and the evolution of it. And then Nope, the writing is still great, but from a directional perspective, it's just off the
There
chart.
is this kind of like this pendulum, or it's kind of a pendulum between directing and writing kind of swinging, and Us was sitting right there
a
in
little
the middle.
bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Nope is still great, even if I slightly prefer Get Out. I mean, all three of his movies are excellent.
I agree. I agree.
I don't even know if it's worth ranking them, because they're just all really, really good. But
they're all so different, but they're also not.
Yeah.
Like they all clearly feel like they came from the mind of like the same mind, right?
Yeah.
And that's the sign of a great director, when they have such versatility without like some directors, when they try to showcase versatility, they go too far with that it's like, okay, none of this looks at all alike. And that could be a fascinating thing, but it's sometimes fun to look at them as auteurs, and we find what makes them unique in and of themselves. Like, you look at their whole filmography and you can dissect the similarities there. And you could do that with Jordan Peele, yet none of his 3 movies are anything alike either. Like, I love that about it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what makes all 3 of them such distinct experiences, and why you're salivating for the next one, because you have no idea what he's going to bring.
Exactly.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Love that pick there. All right, for my number 1, this is a movie that is in my true top 5. So this would probably be the film I would substitute with Get Out. However, similarly to Ad Astra, I've never really had an opportunity to talk about it before. So it felt appropriate to still have it here, and doubling down on how appropriate it is given our inspiration here. It is Denis Villeneuve's Arrival.
I really thought you were going to leave this off the list.
Yeah,
I really did, because you did a whole write-up on it.
I did do a whole write-up on it, but again, I've never had this on a list before because it's still so relatively new, right? And so we've never had a topic, especially within the realm of sci-fi. I mean, how many times have we noted on this show that we haven't had we haven't done enough sci-fi list. So yeah, it is Arrival. And I guess I don't need to talk about it in depth too much. It is a film that we've reviewed here on the show. It's one of the few films I've written an essay on. You can find it at InSessionFilm.com. But essentially, what I love so much about Arrival, aside from Amy Adams' performance, but it's certainly crucial to the film's thematic core, but it's so powerful as this allegory for decoding and interpreting the tragedy of our lives. That is what that movie is about, which is why I love that the film funnels those ideas through Louise, who is this language interpreter, trying to figure out what these aliens are, why they're here, what are they saying. Like, she's trying to decipher all of that. And it's just the perfect metaphor for how we try to cope with tragedy, as she certainly experiences in that film. Even if we don't comprehend it, we might not know what the aliens are trying to say. We might not understand why these difficult tragedies happen to us, but we do try to interpret it. And how that comes about in the film, I think, is extremely profound, especially with this gift that Louise is given at the end of the film as it relates to choice and what that means. In fact, I've talked with Brennan about it as well. I've actually mocked up a T-shirt that we could put up at the InSession Film store. I haven't actually put it up yet, but I've thought about it because the line of the film that resonates so deeply that I think about all the time is that line about, facing tragedy. What would you choose if you could relive it all over again? And she simply says, I would choose it every single time. Knowing that the tragedy is coming, I would choose it every single time. And with my kids, it's such a deep, profound thought. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around.
It is, but it's also a thought that provokes a pretty interesting debate, because those who wouldn't choose that have very valid reasons for not choosing that as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
that's
the pain
the power
is so
of the movie.
Extreme. Absolutely. Like, and you're right. Like, not choosing that is something that is wholly understandable. Like, I don't think anyone would be in the wrong for wanting to avoid that pain and suffering.
Yeah. And there are different reasons for that too. Actually, I have to give credit to my dad when I watched the film with him, because his perspective was, oh, she made the wrong decision, in my opinion, because why would you subject a child to that kind of pain once again? And it's like, that's an interesting point. It's like even though it's meant to be from one perspective, being Amy Adams' character, but it's like looking at it from other character perspectives there, it's pretty interesting. And I love that there are so many layers to dissect with that movie. And that's the beauty of great sci-fi, is when thematically speaking, it reveals new things depending on your headspace, where you're at in life. And the movie then all of a sudden changes completely, like you're watching it for the first time once again. And I think that's amazing.
Absolutely. And obviously the film is very much from Louise's perspective. It's certainly not about putting the child through any sort of suffering, as much as it's presenting the concept of this is going to happen. Regardless whether you choose it or not, are you going to be involved, is kind of the idea there. And embracing the inevitability, I think, is a really compelling choice that I think is certainly one that I would make. I would rather have the memories and be there. And experience the pain and suffering. And, understanding that other people wouldn't want that. I mean, why would you want that? I totally get it.
Well, sometimes you need it too. It's like, man, it's such an interesting movie. What an interesting movie.
Yeah. No, I it's absolutely incredible. And, and it's certainly how I live my life. It's a little bit of that First Man, Boyhood, Midnight Special, tangibility where it truly impacts how you live your day to day. Arrival is very much that movie for me as well.
Yeah.
Because, we somewhat talked about it earlier on the show, and we very much talked about it on this week's bonus content for those that want to check that out, because when it comes to watching movies, it's sometimes a bit of a struggle for me because I have 2 kids at home and they're my priority when I'm at home.
Yeah.
Watching movies is very much secondary. And some of that is born out of inherent parenthood and wanting to be with your kids. But some of it is very much what Louise is talking about here when she makes this choice of, I want these memories. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. If I have to, if unfortunately, knock on wood, I experience what she does, I want to be able to have these cherished, moments in my life.
Yeah.
And I will take that every time. Knowing that the heartbreak is coming, I would take that every time.
I think that's the beauty of the movie. It really, because like, even if I wouldn't take that right now, that doesn't necessarily mean I think it's wrong to take it. Like that's a beautiful notion. Yeah, this movie kind of rocks.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And also it's just like beyond the thematic integrity of it and its insane complexities. It's
a great thriller. Yeah.
It's a great thriller. The visuals are really great. Very immersive, transportive film.
It's got a murkiness to it, which I really like, and that's courtesy of Bradford Young cinematography there. This is the only time that Denis Villeneuve has worked with Bradford Young, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, he works with a few different cinematographers, and yet all of his films have a similar like Denis obviously makes movies like he is a cinematographer, that he's able to work with different cinematographers, and yet somehow his movies still look like they come from the same mind. Like they have similar there's a methodical flow to them, the way they're framed, the way the way overhead shots are treated. There's a scale to them. But
the scale is incredible in this film as well.
Yeah, but Arrival has kind of like a fogginess to it, like a literal haziness to it that almost makes it feel like, even though it's an alien film, it sometimes feels like a ghost story in some ways.
In a lot of ways it is.
Then. Yeah.
It's almost a literal ghost story when you think about what's driving her choices.
Yeah.
And how that comes about, which is the brilliance of the fogginess, because it does mimic the storytelling and how it's working backwards as much as it's working forwards, which we don't know at the beginning. Like that's a reveal that comes late in the film, which is what makes Amy Adams' performance so brilliant. But there is a fogginess to the storytelling that makes sense of that in the cinematography.
Yeah.
And also, we talked about Max Richter's score, which is great, but Johan Johansson's original score here invokes that murkiness as well.
What a great... We lost him too soon. Lost him way too soon.
So, like, it's such a brilliant film and a masterpiece of like... I know you and I have not done our Dune Part 2 review yet.
Not
we'll
yet.
Get to that shortly. And as much as I really like it, as much as I love a lot of Denis films, Arrival is still his best movie. It is his masterpiece.
It's between that and Sicario, as we talked about in the last episode. But those are the two I think
are the two.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They're going to hold true for me for quite a while, I think.
I agree. I don't think that'll change for you when you see Dune Part 2. It certainly has, and I'm a big fan. When we do the review, I will be a defender of that film, but I loved it. But Arrival is still his film for me. And Sicario,
yeah.
For sure.
Not surprised. Not surprised to hear that from you.
At any rate, all right. So as we wind down here, I guess we need to talk about our true list and the films and our criteria.
So there are definitely 5 films I have here that we clearly left off. On your side, I'm sure you obviously left off Midnight Special.
Yep.
I'm guessing you also left off Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yep.
And Children of Men.
Yep.
Her, Spike Jonze film. And then, of course, Spielberg's AI, Artificial Intelligence.
Yep.
Now, was that your, did most of those fall into your true list in some way?
Yeah, so the 5 films that I have on my true list, or that was in my criteria that fall into my true list. Eternal Sunshine, I love, is in that 6-7 range.
Okay.
Great movie though, absolutely great movie. But the other films was Midnight Special, AI, Her, Children of Men. Those 4 absolutely in my top 5.
Okay.
On a true list alongside Arrival.
Okay.
Get Out. I mentioned is in my criteria. I did not mention because I've talked about that film a lot. I recently just talked about it a few episodes ago, like a month ago when we did that Sundance list. So I didn't want to talk about Get Out again because I have, even though that's relatively new as well. But there's been opportunities to talk about it, and I have. So I left that off. But that's fighting with Eternal Sunshine for like that 6-7 spot. That's like where those would go. But my true 5 would be Midnight Special, AI, Her, Children of Men, Arrival.
Okay,
those
that's
are
good
my
5. Yeah, I know my top 3 on a true list would have been AI, Her, and Children of Men in that order. So good thing we did it this way because then we had no crossover. We could talk about as many films as we wanted to.
Yeah.
On a true list, my number 4 was probably WALL-E. But I feel like I've talked about it quite a bit already, and that's a film that does fall within like one of my all-time favorite films. Like it's somewhere probably in my top 50 at the very least.
Great movie.
So I wanted to disregard that. Admittedly, given the nature of how we decided to do this, I don't really have a true number 5. I feel like that's kind of like it's like 5A through 5 W or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
It might actually be Nope. Like given how much I'm loving that movie as time goes on, it might be Nope, but I mean, I did think about maybe trying to fit in Ex Machina or Snowpiercer or Annihilation or Moon. Maybe Minority Report would be my true number 5, but then that's 2 Spielberg films in my top 5. So it's, needless to say, a lot of really good sci-fi movies to talk about here.
Yeah.
We're just scratching the surface, my friend.
Absolutely. Ex Machina was the other one for me. So that's kind of like Eternal Sunshine. I don't really have any basis for this other than instinct. I feel like I've talked about Ex Machina before.
That was my thought with that film as well as WALL-E. It just felt like instinct for me.
So I wanted to highlight some of these others. And also Ex Machina is a loved film. I don't need to champion that one as much, where obviously I went with organically kind of went with films that I feel like are not as championed.
I will say I almost did go with Annihilation for my top 5 for this list because as time goes on, I'm kind of appreciating the weirdness of that movie more.
I love it too.
And the fact that it technically did inspire Frozen 2. So
yeah, exactly. Never forget. Hashtag
never forget. Never forget.
Absolutely. But Annihilation, I love. Ex Machina, just to finish that point real fast, like Eternal Sunshine, because I mentioned Solaris, Ad Astra are all in that 6 through 10 on a true list, and Ex Machina is probably that other one as well.
Yeah,
that probably rounds out, my 10 there with Under the Skin very much in there as well.
Under the Skin I had on my list. Yeah, I'm just gonna read off a bunch of films because we haven't even scratched the surface on some other great ones. But like, let's see. Mad Max Fury Road is one that I'm sure a lot of people would be thinking about. I love The Matrix Reloaded a lot more than maybe most people do, so I almost thought about that one. Let's see. You mentioned Under the Skin. That's a great one. I guess we have to at least call out Blade Runner 2049. I know a lot of people would want to see that one represented.
Yeah. I'm pretty high on that list. I know there was debate, somehow a weird debate between that and the original Blade Runner.
Hey, both can be good movies. Who cares?
Both are great. I like. Yeah. I think those two movies are very much like what we talked about with Star Wars, and that they complement each other.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a clear favorite of the two, but I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to fuel that fire. I just don't want to do that. That's not a fun conversation for me. They're both good movies. Looking at this list as well. Okay, so Christopher Nolan, Inception, I think should be talked about. I know some people would have Interstellar. I'm not the biggest fan of that one. I think Inception's a more interesting movie.
Mm-hmm.
Melancholia, the Lars von Trier film, I actually quite like.
Right here. Yep.
And I know you said animation is certainly one that has some gray areas, but I'm hard pressed to consider Isle of Dogs as a sci-fi movie.
Yeah. I can understand that. Again, like there's going to be a gray area with a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So, like,
okay, well, heck, how about this? Keeping to the Wes Anderson theme, what about Asteroid City?
Asteroid City, I saw that on some list.
Yeah.
And I was like, it doesn't scream conventional sci-fi, but it definitely is.
Yeah,
So,
it is.
Like,
Yeah. But those are some that I had on my list. It's just to at least call out some of the other great ones that we didn't get a chance to.
I'll reiterate both Dunes. I that's kind of the inspiration here, but I think those two movies are really great, invigorating. Like they're like these large epic spectacles that you don't always get these days. Between Villeneuve and Nolan, hopefully we can start to get more of them. But I at least wanted to shout them out. I think they're really great. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I'm not sure if you mentioned that.
I didn't mention that one yet, but that's a good call. Yeah.
For me, Moon.
Yeah.
Upstream Color is one that I thought about here.
Source Code I really like too.
Source Code. Looper. Did you mention Looper?
I did not mention Looper. No, it's a good call.
Attack the Block I quite love.
That's another good one.
Safety Not Guaranteed.
Oh, yeah, when Colin Trevorrow still made decent movies.
Even if he's just made the one good movie, that movie is genuinely quite good. The rest of his filmography is debatable.
I don't hate the Book of Henry.
I don't either.
It's better than any of his Jurassic Worlds.
I agree. Yeah, there's been some great sci-fi movies in the 21st century.
It's good genre. Good genre.
All right. Well, I guess with that, we can go ahead and wind down here. If you agree or disagree with any of our lists, please let us know. You can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or if you're watching us on YouTube, simply leave a comment below. We would love to hear from you and what your top 5 will be. Well, speaking of Dune, I mentioned a little bit ago that we will have a review for Dune Part 2 coming very soon. We'll also have a review for the Adam Sandler film Spaceman.
Very sci-fi themed. I love this. Yeah, you would think a theme was a brewing here when we came up with this topic.
Yeah. So those two movies coming out the same weekend, maybe pure coincidence, but worked out really well for us.
It definitely did.
And I'm curious to hear what you think of Spaceman, because it's a movie that speaks so highly to my sensibilities and certainly a lot of yours.
Yeah.
But I think there's conversation to be had about how effective it is. So I'm curious where we land there.
I'm very curious. Yeah. Given that it's a first time directing job from the same man that gave us the Chernobyl miniseries, which is a very effective miniseries. So I'm interested in that regard.
And I believe it's based off of a book, if I'm not correct.
Okay.
If I'm not
that I'd have to look up. I'm not really sure.
I think that's the case. And if so, I'm not familiar with any source material.
Okay.
But it's fascinating to see Adam Sandler doing these kind of roles again. And do love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, looking forward to those two reviews. Of course, we'll have Women in Session coming out later this week. It's such a crazy week between Chasing the Gold and the reviews in this show. It might be delayed by a day, but it's coming out, so be on the lookout for Women in Session. Looking forward to what they have on the docket this week. And then stay tuned for the Oscars. So next week we'll have Brendan and I will talk about the Oscars here on the main show. Chasing the Gold will have, of course, probably a more in-depth reactionary episode as well.
Yeah.
So you can be on the look for all of that. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please rate and review us. We really do appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video, join the community, join the membership.
Please do.
Get access to the bonus content, all that fun stuff.
Become a VIP.
Yeah, exactly. We love a good VIP. Anything else, Brendan? Am I forgetting anything?
I think that just about covers it. Yes, we will be reviewing Dune Part 2 and Spaceman. I still have to see Dune Part 2, which is kind of a shocking thing as we're recording this because the weekend is over. You would think I'd be living under a rock or something like that, or maybe the better analogy is living under the sand. And I kind of was this weekend, so I have to rectify that pretty soon.
Yeah, Brendan was in the sand, not experiencing Arrakis as
playing with the worms.
Yeah, of course you were. That's why you were not in Arrakis.
I'm a dirty boy
with his worm. At any rate,
that just got really weird, really quickly.
Do whatever. One more time. We have some bonus content out this week, so if you're interested, be sure to check that out on Patreon, here on YouTube, or on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, sign up for the subscription there. That'll do it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Love a good sci-fi. Arrival. Amy Adams. Could have won the Oscar.
You should start reading some more sci-fi books. A lot of great stuff there.